Hello, listener. I'd like to tell you about a short story that has stayed with me for a very long time. I first read it when I was about 10 years old, and at the time I didn't really quite understand it. To me, it was just an odd story about odd people doing weird things for no logical reason. But it stayed with me, and I think about it quite frequently. And I had lost the title for years, but I found it now again recently. And the story is called Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut. And it is basically a sort of critique of extreme egalitarianism, a satirization of it, really. Although, in this modern day and age, you'd almost could see it happening, really. I'm gonna just read you a quick summary of the plot, and then I'll do a quick analysis. It's not going to be a very long video. I mostly recommend people read the short story themselves. It's not very long, and it's very, very funny and very, very appropriate to this modern day and age. So I'll summarize the plot here. In the year 2081, the 211th, 212th, and 213th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution dictate that all Americans are fully equal and not allowed to be smarter, better looking, or more physically able than anyone else. The Handicapper General's agents enforce the equality laws, forcing citizens to wear handicaps, masks for those who are too beautiful, loud radios that disrupt thoughts inside the ears of intelligent people, and heavy weights for the strong or athletic. One April, 14-year-old Harrison Bergeron, an intelligent, athletic, and good-looking teenager, is taken away from his parents, George and Hazel Bergeron, by the government. His parents are barely aware of the tragedy of their son being taken away by the government, as Hazel has average intelligence, which is a government euphemism for stupidity, and George has a handicap radio installed by the government in his inner ear to regulate his above-average intelligence. Hazel and George watch ballet on television. They comment on the dancers who are weighed down to counteract their gracefulness, and masked to hide their attractiveness. George's thoughts are continually interrupted by the different noises emitted by his handicap radio, which piques Hazel's curiosity and imagination regarding handicaps. Noticing his exhaustion, Hazel urges George to lie down and rest a handicap bag of 21 kilos locked around his neck. She suggests taking a few of the weights out of the bag, but George resists, aware of the illegality of such an action. On television, a news reporter struggles to read the bulletin and hands it to the ballerina wearing the most grotesque mask and the heaviest weights. She begins reading in her unacceptably natural, beautiful voice, then apologizes before switching to a more unpleasant voice. Harrison's escape from prison is announced, and a full-body photograph of Harrison is shown, indicating that he is 7 feet tall, 2.1 meters, and burdened by over 300 pounds, 140 kilos, of handicaps. George recognizes his son briefly, before having his thought eliminated by the radio in his ear. Harrison himself then storms the television studio in an attempt to overthrow the government. He calls himself the Emperor, and rips off all of his handicaps, along with the handicaps of a ballerina, whom he proclaims his Empress. He orders the musicians to play, promising them nobility if they do their best. Unhappy with their initial attempt, Harrison takes control for a short while, and the music improves. After listening and being moved by the music, Harrison and his Empress dance while flying to the ceiling, then pause in midair to kiss. Then the Handicapper General enters the studio and kills Harrison and the Empress with a double-barreled shotgun. She forces the musicians to put on their handicaps, and the television goes dark. George, unaware of what happened on the television, returns from the kitchen and asks Hazel why she was crying, to which she replies that something sad happened on television, but she cannot remember what. George comforts her, and they return to their average lives. It's a quick summary. The short story itself is longer, of course, and it's much more interestingly written. Like I said, Kurt Vonnegut is a very, very sadistic, has a very sadistic humor, so it's very, very funny, but it's also quite painful to read this sort of banality of evil. And that's what it is. It's sort of a story about the banality of evil, of why for like a supposedly good idea extreme evil can be done, and at the same time a sort of a critique of Marxism. It can be seen in two ways, in my opinion. You could see it as a liberal critique of Marxism, where it's the oppression of the individual and the ultimate self-actualization of the individual that is that overcomes the Marxist equality doctrine. On the other hand, the way I see it more appropriately is this is the reimposition of natural order, is the superior man, the one born to rule, who comes back, restores things such as they are, and imposes top-down aesthetics, beauty, natural order again such as it is. I mean, the first acts he commits are release the musicians and make beautiful music, find a mate, and there's implicit fertility in that. But of course, he is killed in the end by the handicapper general, and that's kind of the tragedy of the story, where things are allowed to continue to decay. There's never a hope. There's never hope in any Vonnegut stories. The other thing I find interesting is, of course, that the father is sort of like the example of the passive conservative. He refuses to resist, despite being handicapped and burdened and oppressed, and being intelligent enough and physically strong enough to do something about it. If the father had acted and organized, the son would never have to take a lone wolf action and die pointlessly. But that's how society is. It's the same with today, where the middle class just allows itself to be taxed to death for the benefit of the elite and the underclass. The productive are pillaged for the unproductive. Anyway, I like the short story. I find it very, very appropriate for this day and age. It's almost to the point where you could start thinking perhaps this isn't going to be satire in 10 years. The way things are going now with the absolute lunacy of society, you could see this happening. It's went from in the 1960s, when this was first published, to a very extreme satire of some inclinations of the left, to a reality where to a point where in this current reality you'd be like, well, maybe they would start handicapping people to ensure more equality, because they do other really, really tyrannical, weird things to ensure equality, with positive discrimination and all these sorts of things. Well, anyway, my main point here is you should read the short story. It's very interesting. It's very appropriate. It's a good one to bring up to like friends at parties to try and illustrate the state of society to them today.